Welcome to Under the Hood Podcast. In this podcast, we pop the hood and give you an inside look at the hows and whys of our ministry here at Cornerstone Church. I'm Michael Nave, your host. It is great to have you join us for this episode, and the immediate context is really important for this one. 2 weeks ago, evidence was provided of sins committed by one of our pastors against several teenage members of our church family. We took swift action to remove him from the building, and he was terminated upon the findings of our preliminary investigation. Because of a few brave young members, safety has been restored to our church, and we are taking the steps necessary to ensure the safety and flourishing of our youth and children. This has been quite a journey for us. And as I think about what we have been going through, I think about when medical professionals do an autopsy. And they look back and they look at why did this happen and what steps were taken. And in an autopsy, there actually is no benefit to the deceased. The benefit are to those who are alive and will learn from what happened to that individual. And as heavy as that sounds, we've been in a really heavy situation. And I think today's episode gives us an opportunity under the hood to look at what have we done, and at the same time, what can we learn from this journey that the Lord's been guiding us through. And today it is an absolute joy as we look under the hood to welcome Jon McCoy to the conversation. Jon, it is great to have you in the studio. It has been an honor to have you right there in the midst of this entire process. When those allegations were made Friday about noon, you were here that afternoon, evening, and it's almost not stopped since in those last 2 weeks. So I really appreciate you being here, being willing to have this conversation with me, for us. And just to kind of bring you into the conversation, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in all of this.
Yeah, no, thanks for the invitation to join the podcast this morning. So yeah, I've been elder here at Cornerstone Church since November of last year. So it's kind of new territory for me over the last couple of months. Wife and I have been here for 5 years at Cornerstone. And then beyond that, we're plus 2 kids from when we first started coming here. So we're navigating new seasons of life with kindergarten, with Bowden starting kindergarten this fall, and the whole managing your schedule for drop-off, pickup. So as you say, like 2 weeks ago, jumping into this, it's only been possible with the community of elders and leaders that we have here to navigate through this. So very appreciative of the whole team just jumping in and saying, hey, it's the start of a school year. We've got all these other things going on, and where do you need us? Right. And I think that's been the heart of all involved thus far. So it's been really cool to be a part of that. So.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Okay, so you and I have been talking about what we were going to call steps. Like what are the steps we've gone through, and we're just going to have a conversation and share with our congregation and others, like what are the steps that we took? What was it like to be at each of those steps, and what are we learning as we go along? Yeah. So let's just jump in here and get started. Step one. Step one I have described as the first important step to take is to be aware of those emotions that in a situation like this are raw and surging at times. I have bounced between shock, shame, and anger, just being completely vulnerable. I still distinctly remember multiple times that I sensed that shock and as it set in, and just tears running down my face. And then it would jump over to the feeling of shame. Like, how did I miss this? Wait a minute. I must have done something wrong for this to have happened in our congregation. And then jumping over to anger of like, wait a minute. I trusted this individual. I invited this individual into my home. I invited this individual into our congregation. I entrusted to this individual my family, spiritual and my own biological family, my own home, and just monitoring and being aware of this pinball machine in my head that was happening, and you were right there. What did you see as we were processing this together?
Yeah, I think so many people have different perspectives on the way that they process this.
Yeah.
I think of the individuals that came forward, that raised their hands, their perspective on this, how they're processing. I think of the families that we were talking about. I also, think of those that were on the elder board, on staff, as we navigated through this, that we're seeing this from different perspectives. They're all at different parts on the journey for experiencing those emotions, and asking those questions of, how did I miss this? Or what did I not see that I should have seen? Kind of doing that post analysis of where, what did I miss?
Right.
And in that, I think one of the biggest emotions I've seen is this grieving process of up until, Friday of 2 weeks ago, everything is just kind of moving forward. Like we were advancing the gospel in Southern Illinois. We're doing ministry in Cornerstone. And then now you have this event, this moment, that just completely changes the trajectory of the relationships of people that we're doing ministry with. So I think people are processing that in different ways. When you talk about the emotions of shock or shame or anger, I think what really has stood out to me is just, where different people are on that journey. Again, depending on their perspective. I even think of those that have no idea what we're talking about.
Right.
Like they have a perspective as well.
Yes.
I think that's been interesting to see different people processing those emotions throughout this journey.
And I appreciate you sharing that of saying like, some people don't even know it, and just realizing, when you're at this stage, maybe you've moved over to anger, and somebody else is just about to have the shock. It's like, oh, okay, we're at different places in this journey, and just all the rawness. I mean, we were in a late night elder meeting the night before this broke, and I was the one who said, we've got all this stuff going on, but here's what I know, and I cited this staff person doing such a great job, and come to find out the next day I was totally wrong, and just to recognize what happens inside of you when that hits you in the face or the gut, and it's like, whoa. Now, when we were talking about these emotions, you mentioned a path to action.
Yeah.
What were you referring to there?
Yeah, so I think, it's always interesting that our actions don't necessarily flow from the facts themselves. They flow from this emotional state of how we feel about the facts, right? So you see and hear something, you've got an event that happens. I tell a story about that. Like I have my own worldview or my own opinions that typically wells up emotions inside of me. I think, for the individual that maybe they've walked through something similar at another church, at another ministry. Right. So when they see and hear this information and they tell themselves the story and they have their own opinion and perspective on this, that may bring up a truckload of emotions that is operating potentially more intensely from someone that's walking through this the first time, right? So I think that path to action there is just an awareness that we have to guard acting on our emotions and stepping back and acting on what are the facts? What do we really know? Right. And I think when you mention, Friday evening, when we were getting together with, I think all the elders came in, and I remember sitting back there with Nathan, and he's kind of briefing. I think you had actually preached that night.
Oh,
on
yes.
Friday.
Oh, yes.
So Nathan, is briefing Nick, Jake, and Justin, and Brad, and myself. And with that, there was a lot of emotion in that room.
Right.
A lot of shock, a lot of, frustration. And I think that's the moment where you have to step back and say, okay, I'm aware of these emotions. Now let's get to the facts. What do we know to be true? And I think that was the launching off piece for us as we continued our discussion.
Absolutely. Great segue, because step one is be aware of the emotions, and how that is changing the way you're reacting to someone else who's still telling their story. Like, you're being flooded with these emotions, and yet it's really imperative that you be quick to listen, slow to speak, and in this case, slow to react emotionally. And as you just said, that then takes us to the facts. So we would say number two, accurately define reality, no matter what it might reveal. Like, as we had those interviews, those meetings, those honest conversations, it was imperative for us to be willing to find out whatever we found out. And one of the things I truly admired about our elders in this process is not once did I ever get even a subtle hint of, Michael, how's this going to turn out? What if people find out? What if it hurts attendance or giving? Or, like, not once was there a moment where I felt like our leaders would want me to hide anything or want us to shy away if it got too squiggly under the rock kind of thing. There was an absolute commitment. We're going to find out what are the facts. You said a phrase, listen to understand, not to respond. Share about that.
Yeah, I think what stands out for me in those meetings, when I say listen to understand, is they weren't, an investigative like CSI Miami episode. We weren't just asking them these questions on a clipboard where we're going through. I think I had even proposed some questions early on.
Yes, you did.
To Nathan, but we weren't just going down. Okay, so tell me, when did this happen? What was the pattern? Who else was in the room? It was more of just hey, we're available. Like, I want to understand, what have you been walking through? What led up to you reaching out to someone in the church and saying, hey, this feels off. This feels like this behavior isn't in alignment. And I think that was the tone where we wanted to just receive information, right?
That was one thing that I really had to fight, was jumping ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, so if that's true, then it's going to be dun, 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 dun. Here's the next 14 steps that we're going to have to take. And instead, stay in that moment of accurately defining reality.
Yeah.
Like, what happened? What are we hearing? What is reality? So I completely agree with you. My mind, wanted to make a clipboard, and my mind wanted to create a list of questions. But that second really important step was to accurately define reality, what actually happened, and to be willing to flip the rock over and see whatever was underneath that rock. So step one, we're going to be aware of our emotions. Step two, we're going to accurately define reality. And once we do that, then we can go ahead and take that third step of discern and order necessary steps. In a way, it doesn't start just with number three. Like, we've been already taking steps to this point.
Sure.
But in our situation, now we can begin to craft a plan of how do we respond to what we have been told. And some of those had to happen really quickly. When the allegations were brought to my attention, Nathan and I walked directly to his office and said, do you know what's going on? He said no. I gave a very short, brief explanation of what had been brought to my attention. And I said, go home. You need to leave the building right now because safety is paramount. Like, we cannot continue. And then as we went through that process and began to weigh what was happening. It did go in this situation from a go home to an official suspension the very next day, and then what led to a termination on Monday. So all of that in like a 72-hour period. But it would not have been the right step when allegations were made to bring about a termination. Like, boom, you're fired. It's over. No. Let's ensure safety is in place, and now let's allow for some time to actually take the necessary steps at the right pace. And for us, with all the emotions raging, like there was a moment on Friday night where it's like, yeah, it's over, termination right now. But what we did was we were able to say, okay, what has to happen immediately, and then what time do we need to be able to process this more completely as we're going together?
Yeah. I think something that stands out to me in that process, Michael, is we all had different speeds at which we were processing and
yes, we did.
Comfortable with going to, step 1, step 5, step 10. And that's one of the things that I think was important of having multiple people present in this process that's us safeguarding each other.
Yes.
Where we have that kind of check moment of, okay, well, let's maybe pump the brakes.
Right.
Like, have we ensured safety? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Are we really working against a clock now that we have to make that decision right now? And I think that was the benefit of having multiple perspectives in the room when we're walking through that, because we are navigating this together. And I think when you pop the hood of, Cornerstone's ministry here, no one person has it all figured out and has the playbook.
Correct.
So this was a first for, I would say, almost everyone in the room that we're navigating this.
Yes.
So I really appreciate in those moments, we can have a differing opinion of what we say as far as what we think we should do next or what the timing should be. But in all of those conversations, we got to consensus at the end of that. And that I think that unity in this was really special. So
it absolutely was. And I think back, and even hearing you share just a little bit, I'm reminded of how overwhelming all the variables were, like in the moment, as you start thinking, okay, what about this and what about this, and as your mind goes racing ahead, and if you just did it on your own, like your mind would just continue to spin. And yet in community, as we were able to vulnerably, in those raw emotions, share and think through with different speeds, we did get to that place of consensus and wisdom.
Yes.
With many counselors.
Yes.
It was a real gift. It was intense. Oh my goodness. We spent a lot. I think I spent more time with you than I did with my wife for a week or so. But together we were able to discern and take the right steps in the right order at the right pace.
Yes.
Which gets us to step 4, which would be communicate. Communicate with vulnerability and transparency. And that's hard, because when you don't know what to do next, it feels really vulnerable to talk about it. Am I saying too much? Am I, where I'm a guy who wants to have it all figured out before I start sharing the plan.
Sure.
And being able to communicate in process with vulnerability and transparency, not defensiveness, not going back to step 2, afraid of, okay, where might this go if we find out this thing underneath the rock, but to continue to be transparent and vulnerable. One of my favorite leadership maxims is be yourself. People would rather follow a leader who is always real than the one who is always right.
Yes.
I really like that saying and really appreciate that. People want you to be real. And so vulnerability and transparency allows for that. You boiled that maxim down to a couple things. What was it you said people are looking for in a leader?
I would just add to that, when we think about leaders who are real, I find that people generally look for 2 things. Number 1 is, can I trust you? Like, are you a trustworthy, credible person? And then number 2, do you actually care about me? Like, are you actually investing in me, or are you just using me to achieve the task or the goal that you're looking towards? So when I think of this authenticity of leadership, Number one, can I trust you?
Yep.
And number two, are you for me? Like, do you actually care about me? And I think as we tried to be vulnerable and transparent with all parties involved in this, with our staff, with our church congregation, I really think that was, to me, that was kind of the North Star there is number one, we want to be seen as trustworthy, where we're not holding back information or trying to disguise information. We were very open-handed as we communicated this with our staff, as we communicated this with our church body. But then also this tension of protecting the privacy of the individuals involved, I think is something that it gets a little sticky, because if I don't have the details, I have the temptation to, well, I'll just fill in the blanks.
Right.
Like, I'll tell my own story of what I think happened. And, when imagination runs wild, when we fill in the blanks, I think there's a temptation for us to say, oh, the potential damage to our, Cornerstone's reputation, or the potential damage to the narrative that may be out in the community is far worse than if we just give them all the details, right?
Yes.
And I think we were very intentional about saying, hey, we're not worried about protecting Cornerstone's reputation over handling this issue rightly and handling it with wisdom.
Yes.
So I think that with that vulnerability, though, and with that transparency, it brings other things that are outside of our control into play, and we just have to be okay with that.
Yes. And what one of the things I really appreciate about our church, our congregation, is that when we took that stance, and I said multiple times, I will tell you anything as long as you don't ask me to violate their privacy. I said something like that multiple times.
Yes.
And I was really blessed by, almost surprised by how much our people trusted that. And they understood, that's right.
Yes.
That's right. And the other piece that I appreciated you adding was, hey, we need to help people not fill in the narrative.
Yes.
We know this thing over here. We know this other thing over here.
Yes.
And our minds just create a narrative between. And when we were able to say, hey, we will tell you absolutely everything except violating anyone's privacy, it really helped people stop.
Yes.
And then not run to conclusions. Oh, the church knows this, or the church. No, we'll tell you anything as long as it does not violate anyone's privacy of the people who are involved. They really responded with grace and love. Even when I've shared this publicly, like public statements, even on the radio, have talked about this. People have really appreciated our willingness to be vulnerable and transparent, and at the same time to protect privacy of those involved. It has been a surprising, even blessing to engage this with vulnerability and transparency, and to see how people have resonated with that, and it helped us as a family process what's happened to us.
Yeah.
So that then takes us to step 5 of what I would call communicate as a representative of Jesus' church. You mentioned early on us, getting the facts together, fighting off the temptation to have a list of questions and interrogations, or all those kind of things. Where what we came to realize pretty quickly is that we are not law enforcement or the justice system.
Yes.
Like, that's not our role. That's not our role. I am a mandated reporter, as a pastor. So yes, there would be legal implications of me sharing this with the right authorities. But our job was not to put anyone on trial, or not to analyze the stories of these brave young individuals who stepped forward from a legal aspect, but to let the justice system be the justice system. And so that was a really important discovery that we had to make, that yes, we needed to hear evidence, we needed to hear the stories, but not approach it like a court of law, not get the big lights out, or not ask those questions in that way. And then the other aspect of that that was really important was recognizing as ministers of the gospel, we are flawed people. Anytime I share a sermon, I am a flawed person pointing people to the flawless Savior. And there's a real humility that comes with that. And last week I shared with our congregation from 1 Peter 5:8, be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. And when we have a staff failure like this, it reminded us of the humility we must have as leaders of the church. We are vulnerable. We must humbly approach our ministries with an alertness, because the devil is like a prowling lion seeking to devour, and he's looking for those things that you've dismissed. That's just a phrase I like to use, or that's a word I kind of picked up from back in the day. Just those smallest of things can take us on a path that, left unchecked, unconfessed, hurt a lot of people. So we discovered that it was important to communicate as representatives of Jesus' church, humbly serving our perfect Savior, and we're not the legal system or the justice system.
Yeah, and I think when you look at even ways that we compartmentalize the process for this internally, is ultimately we made an employment decision.
Yes,
we made a decision based off of the facts that we had, that this individual could not continue in a pastoral, functioning ministry position with Cornerstone Church. Is that in parallel to some of these other unanswered questions? The answer is yes. Like, the investigation will continue. And again, that's not us copping out or saying, hey, like, arm's length, like, we don't want to walk through that. That's not an unwillingness to walk through that. It's just recognizing where our authority lies to navigate those things, where our skill set lies to navigate those things. And I think it's actually been a beautiful thing, the way that we have cooperated with the families. We've cooperated with the authorities to say, we're not going to hinder this process, right? But we're also not going to own this process from a justice or criminal proceeding.
I really like how you separated that. And it became crystal clear to us in time, but at first it was a little confusing. Crystal clear. We knew that this individual could no longer function on our staff as a pastor.
Yes.
And that was the decision that was primary to us. And then for the other stuff, running in parallel, as you said, we got to hand that off rightly to those who were in charge of doing that investigation. So based on facts, we made our decision, actually removing him from the building swiftly and then processing it up to that place of termination for his employment. We took the step of doing the mandated reporting. We completely shared with and we definitely did not hinder any investigation. We willingly participated as they asked. But those are two very different things. And so we have continued to work hard to communicate as representatives of Jesus' church, not the legal system. We did what we needed to do for the safety and flourishing of our church. And then we were able to hand off what was not ours. And in that way, that released us from doing analysis and commenting on, okay, well, what are the charges? Oh, hey, that's not us. That's not ours. We did what we were supposed to do, and both on the legal side and for us, most importantly, protecting the safety of our kids, ensuring that was restored very, very, very quickly. Which then leads us to step 6, where we're at right now, which is to seize the opportunity to make our ministry safer and healthier.
Yes.
So, yeah, as one of our staff persons said in staff meeting this week, as little as 2 weeks ago, we didn't sense the importance of making things safer. It was, it was there. It was on our radar screen, but the importance wasn't felt. Now we feel it. Now we're reminded of that. Another staff person said, we need to be we need to be on alert. We need to be accountable for our own health. So here you have leaders in our church processing what happened and what they were feeling, and the opportunity to learn and grow and to take steps now before anything happens in my life, before in any of our staff, and to seize this opportunity to make things safer. And so, yes, to look at policies and procedures and what are we doing now to ensure that this does not happen. One of the things we discovered is that this individual was in a Verge, and we're really big about accountability relationships and having genuine community where you can confess sins and share of struggles. But there was a power dynamic we missed, where this individual was verging with congregants younger than him and under his ministry or under his authority, and just being able to learn from those things of like, oh, it checked the box of accountability and in relationship, but oh, there was a dynamic in play that actually ruined the real peer-to-peer accountability that is intended for Verge. And so even discovering things like that were checked, but not functioning as we thought they were functioning.
I really, it resonates with me, the staff person that says, hey, we've got to be alert. We've got to be accountable for our spiritual health, because I look around and I see staff members, I see even members of our church that are processing, oh yeah, there is consequence to sin.
Yes.
Especially sin that is progressive. And I think my own testimony would be, man, this has caused me to look at what are there behaviors on social media that I have allowed to become just normal in my routine? Are there behaviors in how I speak to other people, whether it's text or whether it's witty banter, that's not glorifying to God? And I think it's healthy for us to take moments like this and kind of recheck ourselves and say, are my behaviors in line? What's the quote that you always have with the 1 degree off?
Oh yeah, Jake Lingle was the one who brought that to us.
Yes.
1 degree is 92 feet per mile.
Yeah. So if we just put that in context here with sin, that it seems subtle, it seems small. That's not going to equate to anything.
Yes. But over time,
I really think that is an opportunity for us to be reminded that this is what's at stake. Not to say that we have to be, strive for perfection. Not to say that we're somehow never going to stumble and sin again if we have all this accountability built around us. But are we cutting those things off when we're made aware of them? And do we have people that we surround ourselves with that are willing to point out that sin and say, hey, John, that doesn't seem like that's in alignment with the gospel. That doesn't seem like that's in alignment with godly character.
Yes.
And when you mentioned the power dynamic here, man, what a learning for, what not to repeat in the future.
It is an incredible gift for us as leaders to discover our own vulnerabilities and to take those steps now to make sure that it doesn't continue on a path that ends up in destruction and harming others. And the other aspect that I see happening in our church is that our current leaders are growing and also our future leaders. So as a church, you're going to see policies and procedures changing as we learn from and we tighten up to protect the safety and flourishing of our children. And to them, what they're going to discover, what they're going to hear more and more is what a healthy leader looks like.
Yes.
How to spot one. What are the fruit? What are the indicators that someone is leading me well? And by knowing what the real leaders look like, they'll also be able to recognize the counterfeit and be able to raise their hand quicker, safely. We're going to make sure that those channels are in place that somebody can say, hey, that didn't feel right. And if they're confident enough to say that to their leader of like, hey, when you said that to me, it made me feel, when you did that, I was uncomfortable. And then at times when there is a power dynamic in play and they don't feel safe to raise their hand to their leader, to create channels where that can be reported to our elders, and say, hey, this person might not even know it, but this is how it's coming across. This is how they're making people feel. This is unsettling to our people, and be able to fix it quickly I'm so excited to be able to extend to our children, our teenagers, our disciples, new believers to say, this is what healthy leadership looks like. And when it's not like that, raise your hand. When it's not like that, please let us know. And here's how you can do that safely, because we want to know the moment something is off as leaders, so we can correct it now and it not become more. And then for our entire congregation, so we can stop it now before their safety or flourishing is inhibited in any way. We're on a journey. We have more steps to take, I'm sure, but we are definitely in this season of learning from and becoming more of who Jesus has saved us to be, and to create an environment, to create the soil, to create a place where new believers and growing believers can flourish in their following of Jesus. It's actually a really beautiful place for our church to be. And I already see God's grace being poured out. I see healing happening. I see growth. I see us fighting off emotions and feelings of things like shame, and yet continuing to grow in what God is revealing and taking steps of obedience. Jon, it has been so good to have you a part of this episode, and even more, it has been such a blessing to have you part of our elders as we've taken this journey together.